We are live. All right. Welcome, everybody, for coming to the November meeting of the Camden Harbor Committee. As I always do, I like to, turn on the mic. That's the thing I like to do. I usually don't. Welcome, everybody, to the Harbor Committee meeting. I always like to point out that this is a public meeting. Minutes are being taken, and we are being recorded on Zoom and on YouTube, etc. Morning, guys. If you do have comments, please address them through me as the chairman at the moment, and we'll try to keep things orderly in that way. We'll see if Bob Perkins brought any good muffins for the rest of us, or if, as usual.
Totally self-centered.
All right.
Self-sufficient.
Yeah, that's about all. I wanted to introduce Chris O'Rowe. That's how you say your name, right? Chris O is on the planning board. He's here, obviously, because we're going to go into a workshop with the planning board after this meeting.
How do you spell your last name, Chris?
RHEAULT.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah. That's just like a boat.
There you go.
You thought he was Irish. Oro. Got that before, actually.
Janice, I'm told that we have.
No, we can hear you. We can hear you. Can you? but
Now you can hear
me?
us?
That's Sophie?
Yes, now I can hear you.
All right, awesome.
Hey, Josh,
Hello.
I just wanted to say that I'm sorry to be missing Bob Perkins muffins. No, I apologize. I apologize for not coming to the meeting this morning, especially given that there's a follow-up meeting with Chris from the planning board. I am hosting another board meeting at 9 a.m. and that's it's been on my calendar for months. So I'm sorry, I just could not get out of this commitment. I also wanted to welcome Jim Bennett to the Harbor Committee. Great to have you on board. And I will follow up with Josh and with Chris on the outcomes of the joint meeting with the planning board and the Harbor Committee. And I will stay on for the hour. And again, my apologies for not being there. I usually prefer being in person with you. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you for joining in.
Hey, Bob, are you a voting member or a?
Well, so
alternate?
I'm gonna change the agenda order since Sophie just changed it for me,
Okay.
and do our committee membership update item before we do the non-agenda items. Welcome, Jim Bennett, everybody. I think everybody met Jim when he came and gave a presentation previously on the December storm and a lot of the data surrounding that. Jim is our newest member. Was appointed by the by the select board at their last meeting. He is an alternate member for this committee. There was a little bit of a snafu or hiccup or something. We were thinking Elliot thought he was out, but Elliot, it turns out his term actually expires in June. So Elliot's term remains in effect. So we will continue on. So now we are back up to a full complement of members. Elliot.
Or maybe you've already covered this. There's only one new member.
One new member, Jim.
At this time.
Yep. Exactly. So welcome, Jim. Jim's email was on the minutes that went around. But if you guys, always if you want to get in touch with each other, feel free and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, we're great. We're very excited to have you, Jim. Do you mind giving just literally 30 seconds on who you are?
Yeah, I've never been known for short speeches.
Well, we'll try.
No. So I've been resident of Camden since 2016. Prior to that, I lived in Bath. I'm an engineer by training profession. Spent 35 years practicing both naval architecture and electrical engineering. So I managed naval radar programs for Raytheon for 12 years. So I have a technical bent. I've been working recently with Northeastern University and MIT on measuring our local wave environment. So I've got a project going We've got two-way buoys out now in the harbor, measuring wave height and direction and so forth. I'm, happy to bring whatever that background is of use to the committee, and happy to fill people in on other things that might be of interest, and
Awesome.
hopefully keep you guys appraised of what's going on in terms of measuring the actual environment.
Awesome. Well,
I have a question for you. on
Sure.
that. One of our concerns is sea level rise. So
Right.
if you're measuring wave heights, is that affecting low tide?
Well, yeah, what's happening overall is the tide range is increasing, so both peak tide and low tide, and the range between them are
So
increasing.
the range is increasing.
The range is increasing, yeah, so it's affecting both high and low. And we are getting height data from these buoys, of course, but that has to be integrated to find, over time to be able to see what an actual sea level is. So I'm hoping we can discuss at some point the need for a tide gauge.
Yeah, I think at some point I would very much like to delve in. I think it'd probably be an item on what those buoys are and what kind of data we actually have for Camden, what exists for Camden specifically, because each site is
And what
so
we're doing
different.
with the data is the other.
Yeah, well, and how the public can get to it if the public can. I know this is a
They can,
privately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the intent is to be able to make it.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Public input on non-agenda items. Does anybody have any non-agenda items they would like to introduce?
Just threw mine in.
Nope, seeing none. All right. Meeting minutes from last time. Thank you, Tom Griffin, for putting together such excellent minutes and for volunteering in Bruce's absence.
You're welcome.
Very
Thank God
cool.
you're back, Bruce.
Bruce's hand hasn't stopped moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not my thing.
That was a nice job, Tom.
Did everybody get a chance to read through and or have any thoughts or comments or motions?
Did have one comment. My name has two T's in it. Elliot has two T's.
Good catch.
I can correct that.
I can correct that one for you if you want.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Could have been the other Elliot that I was referring to.
Do I have a
Make a
motion?
motion to accept the minutes.
Thank you, Mark. A second by anyone?
Second.
Thank you, Elliot. Further discussion on the October minutes?
I'll abstain because I wasn't here.
Yep. All those in favor of accepting the October minutes? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, actually. 'Cause I can vote. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Next, we're going to finish up, hopefully, our harbor fees discussion, which we started last week. Or the week, actually, I think it was the one before that. I think it's when we started it. I brought my paper because we worked backwards according to my math. Does anyone, I mean, we can go through these individually. I'd prefer not to unless people have particular, I think it'd be easier if people have particular items that they do want to talk about with regards to the harbor fees and proposed changes. Obviously, the easiest thing in the world is to just accept as is. But I think it is good that we review all of these, and we have to review each year for the select
I
board.
wasn't here, so I have a couple of things.
Okay.
One.
So we worked, just so you know, Bruce, we worked kind of backwards. We did the benches, the miscellaneous mooring fees, the cruise ship fees.
Okay, is there a fee for kayak rack? Is that the same as a dinghy fee?
No, and we haven't touched those yet. We didn't get
Okay.
to those yet.
The cruise ship maximum number is 175.
Yep.
Does that include, we've been having cruise ships before, have they all been under 175? The ones
Yes.
that are coming? Okay,
Yep.
that's good. And have we made it to the pump out fee yet?
Nope.
Okay, then I'll reserve my comments for then.
All right. Well, why don't we dive into those then? Ooh, getting a little feedback. Do you want to start, Bruce? Then I mean, we can just.
I just had a question on pump out fee, $20. Is that for a season? Who is it? It's for
I
the,
believe that is per, I should have said Steve Pixley will be here, but he had a thing first thing, so. he'll
That's
be here.
per pump out,
per
and
pump
it's
out.
only for the
Day sailors.
day sailors.
Day sailors.
And the windjammers.
Windjammers, yes.
So sort of the commercial boats, basically, the
and $20 per pump out?
passenger per pump out.
You
Yep.
think that might, and it's been free until now? Because we require the pump outs, right?
We do.
So we're also requiring them to pay for the pump outs.
Yeah.
I think,
It is I believe this is a subsidized service now, in that the state has.
State.
Yeah, the state reimburses us, right, Sophie? Okay.
Yeah.
There is a management fee of, our staff time and all of that
Okay.
to do it. So there is something. I think that's why there is a fee attached to it.
Well, and
But
part of the fee was due to the impact on our wastewater system
Mhm.
and the larger pump outs required for the commercial.
And more
boats.
frequent, yeah.
But maybe what we could think about, because those transactions, they're cumbersome, maybe we can roll that into the licenses.
that's what I was thinking.
Oh.
Just increase the license fee and have that.
Increase the license fee to cover, ask Pixley, how many pump outs does he do a summer for the day sailors? And just increase the schooner fee so that there's no catch, there's no, it's easier to just have one payment cover everything, maybe.
And that way you get rid of a lot of the
Yeah,
paperwork and stuff like that.
that's a good idea. How would I guess we would need, all right, so we have to ask Pixley to, he's going to have to tally up, because for the windjammers, which are only in once or twice a week, it's going to be probably a lot different than for the day sailors. Okay. So Steve needs to itemize day sailors versus windjammers.
And my first point was, did we ever get the expenses?
We did. Oh, sorry, they were in the last packet. They were in the October packet.
Oh, okay.
Um,
I missed out because I wasn't here.
Yeah.
I never read it.
it was complex. So I think that's a good one. I think let's just do that. We'll just ask Steve to itemize those, break out those two, figure out how much in general, how much they're being charged, because that way we'll know. I don't want to throw a dart at what that
So
would do.
Are we going to do a motion on that?
I don't think we need to, because we don't know what we're motioning yet. I mean,
Well, it would be a motion to include
But we don't
pump
know.
out fees to the.
we don't know how much it's going to be.
Right.
Are we asking Steve, with the day sailor fleet, what's the average number of pump outs per boat? And that'll be charged flat fee to everyone.
Yep.
Same thing with the,
Yep, it'll be added. So if they're 2,600 and it's $500 or whatever, I mean, yeah.
but he's not going boat by boat what they did last year.
No, I think it has to be a standard. And what I actually like about that is that it might incentivize people to get more frequent pump outs. If they're, they're already paying for it.
That was my
How
point.
much time does it take the staff to pump out either of these?
It's- I think it's 15, 20 minutes, something like that. I would say.
Depends on the holding. My holding tank's 18 gallons and it takes them, once they hook it up, 5 minutes at the most.
But doesn't the hookup and the cleanup and all that, like, it seems like it does take it.
Yeah, it was,
10 to
but they
15.
came right out and did it on the mooring and just pumped it out and they were gone in 10 minutes. But I have a smaller boat with smaller.
How frequently these boats need that?
That's
That's what we don't know.
But we require them to pump out, right? Is
Yeah,
that-
yep.
At
They
a,
are
at a
required.
rate a certain number of times per
Nope.
week or,
Nope,
okay.
we don't have
We just, they need to use it
They need
once
to use
over
it
the summer.
to comply with our marine sanitation requirements. I forget what, it's a inner harbor rule. It's actually, it's not just inner
Oh.
harbor, it's the whole area. It's a no.
I mean, just
Sure,
like
so.
for simplification, 15 weeks, $20 a week for a pump out. It's $300. So.
Yeah, I think we should get actual numbers though from Steve.
Okay.
It's just so that we're not,
When do we expect?
so
Well,
he's coming in 45 minutes, but I don't think he'll be able to give us, I know he won't be able to give us numbers today.
Yeah.
But we can have those for next time. The goal was to I was hoping to finish these today. Clearly not going to finish these.
And that
today.
was my goal too. Instead of kicking the football down the field, let's make a decision and do something.
Yeah, they don't actually, the select board doesn't actually need this until December. So I was hoping to get it done a little bit early. But I just think because it is dollars that let's have some data behind it. Because maybe they're getting pumped out more than once a week. You know what I mean?
Could we do a conditional acceptance and then have it official based on input from Steve when he gets the numbers?
Well, let's go through the rest of the list and see
Okay.
if there's anything more. While we're in the day sailor fees, I guess, the offsite fee, second boat, ticket sales only. I think we only still have one. We only have one of those that's doing that, I believe.
Boats, yeah.
That's Angica. So Surprise has a slip, has a permit, and then they sell tickets for Angica at that same float or dock rather, desk thing. I thought there was a second one. Oh, no, now Periwinkle has its own. So probably
How?
Yeah, all that.
Owl has its own license as
Owl
well.
has its own permit.
Yeah, they both have their own permits now.
They could have two tables if they wanted.
I believe so. All right. Overnight dockage came up at the last meeting. Did we tackle that one?
We did.
Yes.
What did we decide to do on that one? I've actually forgotten.
There's been quite a bit of time on it.
We created a motion. There was a motion, there was a vote.
All right, so that one's done. I just don't remember what it was.
We changed the lengths.
Mhm.
And I don't have the paperwork.
Sorry, this was the overnight dockage of days for day sailors is what I was.
Oh, for day sailors.
Just for day sailors.
We did not touch that.
Because the day sailors and the windjammers are the two that they are up this year. So we'll have to, so this would be for their new contract, would be their fees. So that theirs are, one would argue, more important than the others.
And so far, they're okay with the $40 a night?
Yeah, we've not gotten any,
Yeah, I don't see
Pushback.
any reason to change any of those fees.
No, because we want those boats in there.
we sure do. Yep. All right. Seasonal birthing, we did take up that. We did talk about that last time at great length. Where did we do?
We did, and what was the outcome of that? We're gonna keep it where it is and
But we,
Keep an eye on it.
that's where we added the 70, greater than 70 feet, isn't it?
No, this was
Not
just
a
for
day
the,
sailor.
this was for the seasonal birthing.
Oh,
Oh,
Day
I know what it
sailor.
was. We didn't change it, but we asked Steve to look into a fourth space, or a third space, I guess it would be, at the head of the harbor. So where the Angelique is, we said, let's ask Steve to look into making that a seasonal berth so that we would have 3 seasonal berths for the day sailors up there. Seasonal berthing is it's a strange term, but
Is this,
Oh, right,
is this
yeah.
when Angelique is out?
exactly.
Yeah.
It's secondary, and it's in the ordinance that the town can lease those spaces out when those vessels are out.
So this is actually talking about sort of temporary summer birthday. not
Yes.
winter.
Not winter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a separate line for winter,
Uh,
to clarify what they are.
yeah, but that doesn't fall under day
Day
sailors.
sailors.
What we're looking at right now is day sailor fees. The winter berthing. What you're-
because it is a secondary, fee. What I'm realizing is,
If somebody pays for seasonal dockage, do they also pay the overnight fee?
if they're not in their seasonal fee, so if someone pays, like Surprise is in the Louis R. French's spot. Surprise docks in that spot. So when Louis R. French is out, they can tie up there. But if Louis R. French is in, Surprise needs a place to tie up for the night if they don't want to use their mooring, which is in the outer harbor. So then they would pay this $40 fee if there's space available, and they will tie up at the public landing. So
Oh, that's the public.
That's the
landing.
public landing.
Ah, okay.
So that's $40.
All right, okay.
And I think that's the thing, is because it is a secondary, obviously $655 for the season is not a ton of money for one of these boats, but it's very secondary. It's a fill-in kind of situation.
So the fee that the commercial passenger vessels, the day sailors are charged now does not include overnight berthing.
That's correct. Whereas, and I noticed it, looking at it, that the windjammers pay a fee. They pay one fee, windjammer per boat fee, it says on here, $4,200. That does include their berthing. So there's a sort of a difference, and it's because they have a permanent berth, if you will, the windjammers. And it's also significant. It is more expensive.
Josh, does that include power and water hookup too?
I believe that there is power and water up there now. I'm not sure. I think they might pay for it themselves. I think they might. I'm pretty sure actually that the windjammers and all those guys coordinate that themselves. So they would pay for it themselves as well. I believe. So anyway, Mark, I think what I heard you say, and I think I share your sentiment, is I'm not really seeing a reason to raise those fees.
No,
No.
I'm comfortable with all the day sailor fees. The only change would be looking into the pump out fees and adding that to the
Okay.
annual fee.
Then do we want a motion to that effect? Be a conditional motion because we'd have to add the pump out fee later. So
Yeah, I'd make that motion, to maintain current fees as is, with the exception of pump out fees to be added to the annual fee.
for the day
The only
sailors.
thing I would add to that, make it the pump out fee part of the license,
Right, that'll be part of that.
part of
that
the
amount will
license,
be-
and based on input for Steve, and say not to exceed $300.
I don't think we need to do the
No.
exceed.
No.
No, okay.
I was just gonna add TBD in terms of the amount of the fold-in,
Actually,
so that we remember that we didn't finish that item.
Right?
Yeah.
I think for this, for the fees, all we need to say is accept the fees as is and remove the pump out fee. Because it's getting.
No, because we're going to add, we're going to
Add it
increase.
license,
So,
but we're not voting on licenses, we're voting on fees.
well,
We're
but
not
the
gonna
license
add it
fee,
to the license.
no, we're not going to add to the license. We're gonna, so this license where it says day
Oh, we're gonna
sailors.
add it to the fee, okay,
Yeah.
all right,
We're going to increase the fee.
all right, okay. I got it.
I think that's fairly clear then. Accept them with the acknowledgement that we're going to increase the day sailor fee by input from
And-
Steve Pixley.
And maybe on the line for day sailor fees, put in parentheses there, includes
Pump out.
pump out.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so we have a motion to that effect. Do we have a second on that? Bruce seconds that. Thank you. Further discussion on the day sailor fees?
Is this motion specifically about day sailors?
Day sailors. Yep.
Oh, they said a motion, okay.
Yeah, we're currently only in the day sailors.
I just want to be sure that Bruce's note doesn't create expectations that people are now getting the free pump out fee as opposed to, in other words, if they read the minutes, they think, cool, it's being wrapped into our fee without knowing that we're going to increase.
We're
that
going to
fee.
increase that fee by that amount.
Right.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Further discussion on that one? All those in favor of that motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. All right. Let's do the Windjammers. I guess I would argue it should be the same, but they also are going to have a pump out fee that would be wrapped in. It'd be essentially the same motion.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Further discussion on the Windjammers? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4,
Wait,
5.
I missed that one. I was right.
Same, it's going to be the same.
Oh, same for the wind.
Same exact process. Their fee currently $4,200 will go up by however much the pump out fee, which they were paying previously. Theirs will go up by that amount.
Okay, so who motioned and seconded?
Bob.
Bob motion.
I
and
second.
Mark seconded.
Did we skip fisherman float?
Nope.
No?
We can go there. We can go there next. I do wish we had Steve on here for this part, but I don't think I think we have 7 fishermen operating from the fisherman float. I don't think we're exceeding capacity yet.
Is there a list of capacity? Or is it
I don't think there is.
something that Steve knows?
Yeah, I think there's something Steve knows in his head.
The only thing I changed there is that fisherman float, the 400 resident, 500 non-resident, that's from May 2nd to September 30th or whatever. Do you have to do an additional $100 if to stay over the winter or to use it over the winter? Or is it that a yearly fee?
You'll have to ask Steve that.
Yeah. And can they even use that float? Don't they pull that float out in the winter?
No.
No.
The fisherman
Not
one?
all of them.
See them in there all the time.
So what was our season on that again? That was May 1 to October 1?
We don't seem to be consistent on the definition of winter.
Nope.
It's only about 2 weeks now.
Well, the dinghy winter permit is November 1 to April 30th, so I would think certainly that seems like
Richard, where do you see the differences in definition of winter?
under fisherman float, it says,
Fishermen, it's October 1st to May 1st. Then there's somewhere else, it's November 15th to April 15th.
Dinghy.
Yeah.
Winter dinghy permit, November 1st to April 30th.
correct.
And in the minutes, there was another change.
Yeah, the berthing, we did winter dockage was November 15th to April 15th. So we now have 3.
So if our goal is to confuse people, we are doing an excellent job.
Well, it's possible that there are different dates for different floats and prices anyway.
Harbor master presence would be helpful.
It would be, wouldn't it? Busted it. Well, I think for now, let's leave it as May 1st, October 1st, pending, we'll see what changes. But in terms of the fees, the actual rates, we're not changing. Is there a proposal to change those? I don't see. Before we go too far up the list, and I'm trying to move this along quickly so we can get to our next meeting, but the dinghies. Bruce, you raised the question of the kayaks.
Right.
So we've got this over 20 horsepower. And then the select board last year, I think it was, added in the no motor or electric category. For a dinghy. So essentially you get a discount if you have a rowboat or an electric motor. And you get a bit of a surcharge, if you want to call it that, if you've got a big engine on your boat.
So where are
no.
these 20 horsepower engines envisioning tying up?
They're still tying up at the dinghy dock and
Downtown or?
downtown.
out at the landing?
all of the above.
Doesn't matter.
All of the above.
I've
yeah.
seen 60 horsepower.
Theoretically, I guess we're saying you can put a 20 horsepower engine on a 13-foot boat because 13 is the limit.
Oh,
Scoot right
I
along.
thought it was 14.
14.
Oh, is it 14? Sorry.
So you could envision putting a 13-foot Boston whaler at these dinghy docks?
Currently, if it's
That makes zero sense to me. And not that I've seen a lot of that, but I have seen the bigger, almost square,
Yeah.
rubber duckies with serious engines on them. It's like the havoc it creates when they get in there blocked in, because they get
I'm with you on
rotated
that.
around in a way that a bow and stern boat doesn't really. And I just can't believe that we are thinking of those docks either downtown or at the landing, at the launching ramp, as being appropriate for boats that size.
Well, the question is, where do they dock if they're on a mooring out in the harbor? How do they come into the harbor if they can't use the dinghy docks?
They can come in like I bring a Mako in and pick people up, but to leave the boat overnight
as a dinghy.
is a dinghy. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
seasonal
I
permit.
understand. I understand. I'm just wondering where
well the
transients or any even.
transients can dock at the transient dock. I don't think I don't know if there's a stated size limit at the transient
Right.
dock
okay,
because that's
all
a
right.
free dock. This is for seasonal dinghy dockage, which I mean, I would say while I share your concerns, that's actually in the ordinance, the total vessel length of the dinghies. If we want to look at changing that, we can. That's a sort of separate issue. I would say that we need to, and we ought to, it would be in our purview to ask the harbor master to make sure that the dinghies that are there are in fact adhering to the 14-foot total vessel length.
Keeping their engines down.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the engine is up, is it now exceeding the
Well,
vessel
even
length?
aside from that,
You know what I mean?
They just cut the shit out of whatever boat
Right.
they're baked in with.
Right. So I think that might be something that we raise with Steve.
So I think
Yeah, it's a separate issue, but
We will have conversations, I think, about like the launching ramp docks. That's been in conversation anyway, and this is part of that sort
Yeah.
of conversation.
But to your point, Bruce, there is no separate fee for kayaks. It's just a dinghy.
Okay.
Is what it's
So they-
considered.
So,
Yeah.
but it is the same fee.
But in order
Same
to
fee.
use the kayak racks, they need to have the sticker and pay
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
whatever
Mhm.
fee. it
Yep.
is. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So now to clarify on what Richard suggested about the winter timeframe,
Mhm.
in 2020, the dinghy winter timeframe corresponds to the rest of the winter timeframe. For some reason, in 2023, it's been changed.
What was it in 2020?
In 2020, it's October 1st to May 1st,
October 1st.
Hmm.
That's
which
pretty
is,
early.
which is the same as the fisherman's float.
Yeah.
So for some reason, it's been changed for the dinghy fees.
When do boats have to be off the moorings? That's November 5th or something, right?
No, I believe it was October 15th.
Off the moorings?
Off the
or
floats.
The moorings.
Which
What are we
may
talking
be
about?
why it's been
Moorings or
changed.
floats?
Floats.
Moorings. Because you need to be able to use the dinghy dock to get out to your boat if it's still out on the mooring.
You don't have to be off your mooring.
Yeah, you can stay
You
on
can
your
stay
mooring.
on all
No,
winter.
I don't think there is
I
a
thought
mooring.
I thought you had to be off
No.
by
No.
like November 5th or something.
No.
You can stay on all winter if you want to.
But I can tell you yesterday, there was not a single boat on a mooring.
Right. But no, I think that's a good point is that people are using the harbor. Certainly in October, I would argue that people are using the harbor pretty actively, which would be why I think a winter permit of October 1, starting on October 1 would be a bit premature. November 1, I think November 1 is actually reasonable.
For that's when the.
I
that's
could
when the date
suggest
is.
October 15th, since I believe in the ordinance that's the finger float
You have
Yeah.
to be off the float, right?
Right, something like that.
magic date.
Mhm.
And I think that's the date that oftentimes, Steve, at least in terms of the luncheon room, you can't count on anything after October 15 because you'll suddenly discover they took them out an hour ago.
Mhm.
So prior to that, it'd be a storm that would make things go away. But my sort of rule of thumb has been I can't count on leaving my rowboat over there after the 15th.
After the 15th, right. So what are we suggesting? Are we suggesting changing the dinghy winter permit dates? Is that,
No,
I kind of like that there's a little.
no, I think it
gap
makes
there.
sense where they are, but
Yeah.
I think it's between 2020 and 2023,
They changed.
it has been changed.
Yeah.
What was the, Mark, what was the change again? It went
It
from what
was
to
October
what?
1.
October 1
To November 1.
And it's now November.
Now
1.
it's November
Now it's
1.
I think that probably makes more sense.
Makes more
doesn't it?
sense.
I think so.
All right, well, let's leave, unless I hear
So,
people suggesting otherwise, I think we'll leave those the same. Dinghy fee is the same.
so dinghy fees, I make a motion that we leave dinghy fees as is.
Does it need to be a motion to
Yeah,
change?
sure. I mean, it's not a change, but why not?
Well, we're making a motion on every category.
Well, I think
That means I have to. cut and
originally we were
paste
going to
even
motion
more.
the changes and then sort of everything else.
I know, but we're.
Doesn't matter. If he made a motion, I seconded whatever he said.
Mark made a motion that we keep the dinghy fees the same. Bob seconds said motion. Further discussion on the dinghy fees. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You voted yes.
I had a question here. I'm looking back at prior harbor fees here regarding dinghy fees in the winter permit, October 1st. That's in 2021. Actually, those are 2022 fees approved in 2021, October 1st. On 23, as Mark has pointed out, now it's November 1st. Well, Steve pulls the docks, let's say, sometime in October. So that means that if you have your dinghy for example, Steamboat Landing after October 1st, you don't have a permit unless you get a winter permit for after October 1st.
Right.
That
Switch over.
doesn't make sense to me. That's the season. The season is as long
One
as the
goes to the
docks
other.
are in. The winter permit applies to docking here in the inner harbor as far as the dinghy goes. So
Well, I think it's-
why do we want to have a winter dinghy permit October 1st? And that puts all the permit holders that are keeping their dinghies in till the last,
Well, we don't. We're in
Minute.
November 1st.
hmm?
We're at
We're at
November.
November 1st.
We're,
right
we're
now.
going to stay with November 1st.
Yeah.
That's where we are
Oh,
currently.
okay. But
We discussed.
it
Yeah.
used to be October 1st.
Yeah, but from 2023, we're going with November 1. So let's stick with that for now and
November.
November. Yep, November 1. All right, we do kind of need to move along here because we're starting to queue up, I think, for the next go around. Anything else? Then now we've got the floats. The only ones left, I believe, are the floats, inner harbor floats and moorings and finger floats. We reviewed
And those
these.
are all sort of general public use
Yeah.
fees. Just to move it along, I'm going to make a motion to keep them all the same.
Thank you, Bob.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Further discussions on the moorings, inner harbor floats and finger float fees.
Yeah.
Proposal to keep them the same.
I'd like to discuss the inner harbor floats a little bit, and I've asked this question year after year after year.
Oh,
And and nobody can actually document the justification, all right? Fact is, non-residents pay the same as residents for inner harbor floats. And
Would you like the reason?
I get the reason, but nobody can actually show me the document that says why.
It has to do with the fact that it's part of the federal permit and the
Yeah.
Army Corps of Engineers,
Yep,
and I don't know where it's written.
Well, so
Because there's a
I,
lot of stuff there.
well,
nobody knows what it's written.
Well, you can't charge somebody from Iowa differently than you charge somebody from Kansas.
so, Mark,
On moorings.
So I did do a little bit of looking into this.
The moorings are not
Whether
part of
it's in
the,
the federal field.
For discussion purposes, hold on, guys. For discussion purposes, I did do a preliminary bit of research into this, Mark, after we had talked previously about this. And I could not find a document to cite. What I could find was a reference to the fair and equitable access rules that the Army Corps has for dredged federal navigation projects. And because the inner harbor is dredged, those need to be fair, those spots need to be fair and provide fair and equitable access regardless of residency. So I got the term, I don't have the document. How does that sound? That's as far as I could get.
Yeah.
I think it's something that we should continue to look at. I actually do think it's a very good point. And I agree with you that it's been mentioned, and with all respect, Richard, because it has been mentioned for so many years.
it comes
But
up every couple of years.
every couple of
And
years.
so what's the
Um,
difference between resident and non-resident on something else, like
Non-resident
moorings?
taxpayer.
No, in terms of a mooring fee.
It's twice. It's
They're ba-
So it's
they're-
significant.
because that's, and they
But
just,
still, if you're gonna pay Bill Kelly to go through the Code of Federal Regulations to find the one, to answer your question, we're gonna spend a lot more money doing that research than we are gonna collect in some additional fee.
And that could go with everything we asked Bill Kelly to do.
Yeah.
You know, we can make that same statement.
Yeah,
So, but the point is, all right, it's for a non-resident, it's almost cheaper to have an inner harbor float than it is an outer harbor mooring.
except for the waiting list that you have to be sitting on for a decade or more.
Yep.
I think it's a great point. I think I would argue it needs more research. I too, Mark, want to see a document. I want to see, it is somewhere, and I don't like that I just
Well,
referenced
it's
the
just in
term.
limbo.
Yeah,
You
it's just
know,
in limbo.
Everybody
I
can
agree
make
with
that statement. Oh, it's because of the
Yep.
federal government. Well,
I agree with
okay.
you.
I mean, they,
Good.
I have some contacts with Army Corps. I can do a little digging myself.
Okay. That'd be great. Further discussion on that. We do have a motion and a second
I have
on
a
this.
question.
Yep.
Probably this has been answered and I haven't understood it. Under moorings, you have resident, non-resident taxpayer, and non-resident. What's this first category that just says moorings? Transient under 40, transit 40 and over in service.
Those are the transient moorings that the town has.
night by
Is it
night.
non-resident, a transient? Because,
No, those are seasonal, non-resident seasonal.
but these are seasonal fees, 200 and 250, right? That's not overnight.
Is that a fee that is
That's
paid
for
by Lyman
transient
Morse
under 40.
for their,
For managing
Oh.
those?
no,
And then you've
well,
got-
you have rental moorings,
Yeah, no,
right?
yeah, those are the commercial transits.
Those are the
So,
transient.
Yeah,
Morris,
commercial,
Yacht Club, anyone
Yachting
who can provide,
Solutions.
Commercial,
you
all
know,
right.
commercial transient, that's what it's gonna cost them.
Maybe we can add that heading.
Scott
Commercial.
Ronyak, you know, he's got 4 transients.
Mark, did I hear you comment that it's possible for a non-resident to have an inner harbor float at less cost than a mooring?
depending on the size of the boat, yes.
So for a non-resident, more over 30 foot, you got
$320 plus $2 a foot.
a mooring at $320 and $2 a foot over.
Yeah, in addition.
Okay,
Because it's federal projects.
So it
we
could
can't
be-
charge more, yeah.
the mooring could be more costly than the float.
All right, any further discussion on this item? Because I do want to move this along. I think we've
So it's been
covered it.
Motion and
Motion
seconded.
and
So-
seconded. So further discussion, I think we're done.
Mhm.
All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much. All right, that concludes the harbor fee schedule. Steve, I'm going to ask for the 1 minute harbor report. 1 minute's all you get.
Good.
Sorry, buddy.
That's all I need. Wait,
We
we've got
gotta
a,
move
we've
in.
got a hand,
Josh,
Mr. Chairperson.
Regarding these fees, are we going to produce a document with our
Yes.
recommendations?
Mhm.
And who does that?
Bruce and I.
And will that be issued for all of us to look at?
Yeah, I think we can do that. Yeah.
Before we send it to the select.
Yeah, I think so. We might just send it around. Say this is.
Then we can kind of,
Yeah. that's a
Just to
good idea.
condense it, just to make it, because there's a lot of discussion, a lot of, and this way we'll just do it with, highlighter. Steve, how's the harbor going?
Thank you for asking, Mr. Chairperson. Gentlemen, thanks for assembling. Just yesterday, I winterized the entire plumbing system for the docks, fisherman area, and the day sailor floats. I also winterized the actual pump out facility on the dock. All boats are out and getting winterized. I'm in the process of talking with Pam Parker. It's been 22 years since the state gave us a state-funded pump out boat. And I've been working an angle with her for the past 2 years, telling her it's getting old, but not harping on it. So we are now going to get a new pump out boat for next year. It's right on target. She's sending a letter right now to finance director because we're not going to make a move to Chris over at, where is he? He's down in Bristol. He's going to be making a new boat for us. It's going to be a little bit bigger, 23-footer. It's going to hold twice as much capacity as for holding. The nice thing is that since we've depreciated the boat, the current boat that we have, she's like, you can do anything you want with that. So we are going to refit that for minimal costs to just get rid of the tank, not the tank, but the actual engine. That's going to be a first respond boat, like a harbor master boat. So that's looking good. I've been talking with Gary Neville about bigger concrete slabs, a company who does it. In contact with one, so I'm going to hopefully in the next 5-6 days get at least an idea of what it would cost to just rebuild the top half of Steamboat Landing, the ramparts that you drive over. That's about it. As far as the actual docks of Steamboat, I'm going to go to the budget committee and say, I was going to try to do 3 a year, but I just think we should. I mean, I can rebuild them so they can last one more summer, and then I just want all new ones for 2025. Yeah, that's the goal there. Yeah.
So I have one question on the last point, because I remember we were having a conversation at some point about, is there a way to create more rowboat storage space there? A way to, someone mentioned you have the floats and you could have a T or an L, and is that something that should be in the conversation before you buy all new floats, or are these floats going to be part of any future re-envision?
No, that's a great topic to talk about. I call it the Ben Ellison L. He always was trying to get the committee to say that we should do that. Unfortunately, with the Southeasters, it was just one more thing. That you'd have to put another piling set in, which is no big deal. But it's so exposed to the east that they all decided it wasn't a good idea. I mean, it's still for conversation. I mean, it's just, we could make a thing where if we do that, and I'm not saying we do, but if you did, we could, unpin it for a storm and just put it to a mooring, not even take it out.
Boats connected.
A big thing is you'd have to literally spend an hour or 2 hours taking all the boats off it, but you got to.
I could also just imagine that when you've got this thing going like this, and then something at the end, that corner is precarious.
Sure. Exactly.
I think that'll be a big discussion.
I don't want to get into that. I just want to make sure that we don't say, oh yeah, let's just replace everything. And then after one season be saying, oh, well, that's.
Yeah, why do we build those?
Well, yeah, the nice thing is you can always just add to that later. Yeah. It's just like you could now, so.
All right, thank you. Elliot.
Steve, I asked this question from the standpoint of electrification of boat propulsion. Could you quickly run down the inventory of town boats?
The inventory right now, as we speak, we have 2 boats. We have the Whaler, which has a 30 horsepower Evinrude E-Tech, and then we have the pump out boat, the Alcar, which is a 20, which will now become, my response boat, or a good boat. It's a great boat for towing when John forgets to fill up his tank of gas and he calls me at 8:30 and I'm trying to have a barbecue at my house. Oh God, Steve, can you come get me? It's great for that. It's fast. It's good towing. So, but that's got a Honda 150 on it. Both gas engines.
And only 2 boats?
2 boats. We sold the aluminum boat last spring. We put that up for auction. 1990 we built that, and the engine needed to get rebuilt, and so a fisherman / inspector actually got it. He's going to repower it.
Does fire department operate a dinghy?
How's that?
Fire department operate a dinghy?
They have a small boat, a small 18-foot or 17-foot, like a Wellcraft with a small engine on it.
Is that in the water?
No, usually on a trailer. If they need it, they put it in. They can put it in the lake or the ocean.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, guys. I think we do need to adjourn this meeting so we can move into our next one. Thank you all. I think we never have a motion, so we'll just end it. There it goes. There's the end of the Harbor Committee
Made
meeting.
away.
Boom.
Thank you, John.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just gonna take off, but thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris. I see you're here. Thank you, Jeremy. I've seen people from the Conservation Commission, I think, joining as the Harbor Committee was proceeding. Thank you all. I wish you all a good meeting. Again, apologies for not being able to stay. I'm really looking forward to reading the outcome of this meeting. And if there's anything I can do to help, Jeremy and Chris and Josh, you always know where to find me. So thank you very much and have a good meeting.
Thanks, Opie. All right, it's yours.
All right, thank you all. Jeremy Martin, I'm Planning and Development Director for the town. I have a few documents there, and they're collated, so if you guys want to grab one, these are all information that you've probably seen before, but I think it's important. It's the first. Hold on, I'm sorry, Pat. What? Yeah, yep. Yeah, so I went to the select board last Wednesday with an update on the pier moratorium because I think it was important to share it with them and remind everyone where we are. And I know it's been kind of convoluted. Go ahead.
Is everybody?
Yeah.
They're all in there?
They are, yeah. And you go to the participants can be shown up.
Lucia and John, and yeah.
So yeah, Ethan, John, and Lucia are planning board members, and then we have Pat Chen here, planning board member, and Chris O'Rowe, a planning board member as well. Again, went to the select board on Wednesday to update them on the pier moratorium, and I think there was a little bit of confusion. Maybe I spoke with Josh yesterday and Ethan, chair of the planning board, on what went to voters and what was approved by voters a couple weeks ago. The Harbor Committee, you guys know, you spent a lot of time working on the moratorium review, and you came up with a report and recommendations. I then took those recommendations and drafted changes to Chapter 108, which is the Harbor and Waterways Ordinance, and then you have to align the Chapter 290, which is our zoning ordinance. You have to align those together so that they read the same. And lo and behold, the select board had a joint workshop with the planning board back in June, maybe it was July, June, with the planning board, and the planning board discussed with them just some issues they have with piers and other structures, and that they were continuing their review. The select board in July extended the moratorium for a third time. And at the same time, in trying to prep for the vote in November, I had again drafted Chapter 108 amendments and Chapter 290 amendments that would align with the recommendations that the Harbor Committee came up with. The planning board was anxious to move those forward because we need to make progress on the moratorium. They did do that. However, during their public hearing process, there were some concerns raised about new moratorium or new piers and other structures. And that was the Conservation Commission had some concerns, and there were some people from the public came to a public hearing. The planning board decided they would continue that discussion, while at the same time, again, they moved the changes to Chapter 108 or Chapter 290 to the select board. The select board, what they did was they actually asked me to tweak those amendments that I did based on your recommendations, because they wanted the moratorium to stay in place, but they wanted to address some of the issues identified in the moratorium: sea level rise, impacts to piers, and the land attached float piece that is now is reviewed by the Harbor Committee, Planning Board, and Select Board. What they did not do was they did not send the amendments forward as I had initially drafted them based on your recommendations. They wanted them going forward to the voters, just applying to existing piers, and again, the land attached float piece. So I think people might have thought that the moratorium was going away when people voted in November. The moratorium did not go away. The changes that were approved by voters apply to new or to replacement piers or reconstructed piers, not to new ones. And it does apply to land attached floats. So that was a little, I think, clarification. Josh, is that kind of what you were looking for on that clarification piece?
Yeah, I'd love a little bit more clarification on, and maybe documentation of when the select board asked for that change. That's obviously a substantive change to our recommendations. So maybe I haven't been able to look through all these
Yeah.
memos, but
I'm not sure you're going to find it exactly.
that's what catches me by surprise.
Yeah,
is-
it was really that, I think it really happened during that discussion on the 23rd of July when they extended the moratorium another 180 days, which gets us out to January, February. So I
And
can
that
dig
time-
up that, yeah.
Yeah, so at that time, they extended it, but said,
They wanted something to go to voters because they wanted to make progress, and that would be the land attached floats. And since the planning board was having these kind of ongoing discussions and workshop setting about prohibiting new piers and other structures, they wanted to continue the moratoriums to allow that to continue, but to get something to voters to address sea level rise of existing piers and to regulate the land attached floats.
So
yeah,
I just want to make sure I understand this. So it turns out that all we voted on was if someone's got a dock out there right now and they wanted, either it got damaged or they wanted to change it in some way, then those details that we worked out would apply to that.
Correct.
But if someone says, I got a cool idea for my new dock, it's moratorium and so it's just stopped.
Correct.
And if that moratorium expires or got challenged, would the new application have to satisfy the changes we did, or would they actually be going back to another version of the older ordinance?
The moratorium is still in place, and I think people could try to challenge it. I think the reality is that the town is making progress, and there's not a whole lot of case law and substantial progress that needs to be made. And I think we are well footed to explain that we are making substantial
No,
progress.
I'm not arguing
So-
whether we are or aren't. It's just
Yeah.
that if you take the hypothetical that if someone did get a court to say, that doesn't sound like progress to me, their application for a new pier would be judged by the regulations that used to be in effect or by the ones the town just passed?
The way that I drafted these, it appears to me, and I'd have to relook at it again, but that it applies to only new piers, or existing piers only, and you can't get a new pier currently.
So
I mean, I understand your point. What if we get challenged? I think the ordinance is pretty clear that it applies to existing piers only and land attached floats, things that weren't regulated before.
Jeremy, please define the current moratorium term.
The term of the moratorium?
The date.
The dates, so they approved it on July 23rd, as I recall, or maybe it was the 28th, the 23rd, I think. There's 180 days, so it gets us out to January, February. I didn't count days, and that's what I ended up having to do, but I think it's January, February, end of January. So the select board will, at that point, have to decide whether they extend it again or not. My plan initially was to, and again, the planning board had multiple workshops on this. I was drafting amendments to prohibit piers and other structures. The planning board at their most recent workshop on this issue brought up, and I kind of brought it up because, and I know that this committee apparently talked about it. I might have missed the meeting, but these other structures, and these are the things like bulkheads, breakwaters, marine railways, and wharves. The moratorium applies to all of those things as well as piers. During the planning board discussion, and I think based on the report that they read from you folks, there was not a lot of comment or discussion about these other structures. And I wanted the planning board to be on top of the issue because I think it's important because the moratorium applies to those other structures. So we had a discussion about that. And these are just residential, mind you, not commercial. The planning board was pretty adamant. I don't know about unanimous, but they were, I think, maybe one opposed, that we should prohibit bulkheads, breakwaters, marine railways, and wharves for private residential properties as well as piers. Any new piers in the outer or coastal harbor. After a discussion with the board, there was concern that residential property may actually benefit from a bulkhead if there is solving a kind of a catastrophic failure of land or potential catastrophic failure to a building because of severe erosion. They wanted someone to be able to put in and say you can't get in the armored shoreline, if you will, because of the way the elevations are, the grade, or just the failure of the land. They thought that there should be a provision to allow a bulkhead for emergency kind of catastrophic situations. And that's what I was working on. And that's when I took this update to this plan or select board last Wednesday.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Are not bulkheads generally constructed to be proactive against erosion as opposed to reactive?
Well,
And what is your logic in telling a homeowner that they can't protect their property with a bulkhead?
yeah, I mean, this is not my logic, my stuff. This is the planning board's discussions, and I staff the planning board.
Well,
But
I mean, you're obviously here kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
representing the board,
Yeah.
so why don't you
And
tell me
I
what
can
the
let-
board logic
I can
was?
let Ethan in and some of the other planning board members in. I think the reality is that we have not seen I have not seen a bulkhead or a bulkhead permitted in Camden Harbor, a residential one, ever since I've been here. I don't know when the last time anyone was permitted here. I know in Southern Maine, they're not permitting them anymore.
Yeah, but we're only talking about Camden, right? So,
Right. Well, sure, but the impact to a resource is the same, and the DEP, I know, is not issuing permits for these in the southern part of the state. Whether or not that's going to change up here or not, I don't know. They were concerned. They initially talked about prohibiting them altogether, and they said, providing someone an opportunity, if there's a catastrophic failure going to happen to their land or to their building, then they should be able to put one in.
so like related to the Christmas storm of last year, would you consider that to be catastrophic?
I think it's catastrophic on the land. The storm itself is not the catastrophe. What's potentially happening to the land due to a
result
storm,
of-
as a result of a storm.
So the trends seem to be telling us that storm surge related to climate change is resulting in more aggressive storms.
Mhm.
I mean, we see that trend. It's backed by science. I'm sure you could agree with that. A bulkhead is a tool that a homeowner can utilize to mitigate the effects of severe storms. The bulkhead helps to prevent erosion of their property. Why would we be telling a homeowner not to utilize that tool to protect their property?
Well,
I think partly it's a distinction of what types of erosion preventative measures were, and I think there's sort of a distinction of bulkhead versus, say, riprap and boulders, fields, and things like that, where a bulkhead is a actual vertical wall.
Right, porous or
has-
non-porous, correct?
Well, it's a bulkhead, I think, is a non-porous wall that has adverse impacts on
adjacent
flow
properties.
and water movement, as opposed to someone saying, yes, there's erosion on the property and I want to put boulder riprap to prevent erosion. Is a different thing.
However, in your definition of a bulkhead, you said a permanent solid or semi-solid porous
Right.
Mhm.
structure.
Or wall.
Which would I would interpret that to be a wall of granite,
Right.
right?
Riprap wood, whatever.
Well, riprap is different. Riprap, this is a vertical wall. Riprap is permitted by DEP. It's got a slope of a certain size. You can't go
Mhm.
higher than a
Right.
certain slope, right?
So riprap's not included.
Riprap's not included in here. And I think the discussion, as I recall, there was the impacts on abutting property owners as well when you do a vertical wall. Is they're different than impacts of a sloped riprapped wall that is generally along the same grades as an adjacent property owner, where if a bulkhead goes in, it is a vertical wall right up to that property line. And
Do we
there's impacts
currently
there.
have regulations in place? So if I, as a homeowner of waterfront property, came to the town of Camden and said, I would like to put up a bulkhead to protect my property, is there a permitting process currently in place for that?
Oh, yeah, just like the piers.
Okay.
I have a question.
And you're contending that that permitting process is inadequate?
I'm not contending that. I think the planning board has had discussions about prohibiting anymore. It's not about that the permitting process is not adequate or is adequate. It's about that they want I think Camden Harbor and the shoreline to be a natural shoreline and not be have structures into the water.
Okay, so the
That's really what
actual
this is.
motivation is that, that's great. I mean, now I understand. So it's not whether or not we want to protect the homeowner or the erosion. We want it to remain natural. That's
Well,
that's
I believe
the
that's true.
premise.
Yeah, and I think.
I mean, just so we can get
Yeah,
down to what
yeah.
is the real premise here?
And again, I think, where you're thinking, where we're talking about outer harbor and coastal harbor,
Mhm.
these are the zones that, it is, a lot of it is protecting that natural environment, but also sort of looking at what's contiguous with those areas of the harbor, where, a bulkhead doesn't make sense in those zones. Like you shouldn't, inner harbor is a different thing, but those bulkheads are already there. So it's not prohibiting repair or maintenance. It's just saying that in outer and coastal harbor, other solutions should be found.
So I have a question. If we start at Steamboat Landing and go around to whoever owns that point now.
Yeah.
Or you start at the yacht club and go around the other way, are there actually any of these bulkheads in place?
The only one I can think of, and I was just thinking of that right now, would be the Kastner one adjacent to, I would call that a bulkhead adjacent to the yacht club. That's the first property in the outer harbor. That's got a vertical wall.
House?
Yeah.
The Watson property has a bulkhead. It's just, it's set in above
It's
not-
got, it's
Oh, right.
it's sort of a bulk.
They do.
It's a wall that's comes down to the beachish area.
Correct.
Yeah, it's close
So there's
to
a,
the
yeah, there's a couple on that section
close
of
to the high water
shoreline.
mark, but it's not always
But
submerged.
basically from that house heading toward Lake Beach and going out, there's none.
Is there a bulkhead at Lake Beach?
No.
No.
There isn't any wall there?
In Dillingham Point, there's no wall there.
It's more like riprap.
Yeah, I mean,
Riprap.
there are a few, yeah, but again, it's not it's not saying that existing would be.
Right.
It's
And it
just-
doesn't apply to Lake Beach either because that's not residential.
Right, not at this point,
Well, the moratorium only applies to residential
at this point, yes.
structures.
What about stairways going down to the water?
Yeah, people can access, there's a provision that allows the code office, we can issue stair access to property owners.
Anybody can build stairs
Mhm.
down to the water line. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
got to be meandering and there's a certain width, maximum width that you can have to it. And you got to meander it generally if you can.
There are several of those on the
Yep.
coastal harbor.
Yeah, we permit those regularly.
Since this is being mentioned as the outer and coastal harbor, I just wanted to be clear, what we're talking about are only structures placed in the intertidal zone. Is that correct? Like if I lived on Marine Avenue or wherever, and I wanted to place a bulkhead above the high tide mark, the high water mark, I could still do that.
Likely you could, yeah.
That would not be covered under this. We're only talking about the intertidal zone. And, okay.
Yeah, that-
I have a second question when I just heard the planning board thoughts that I get the rationale about the discussion of more docks in a limited public space in the outer harbor.
Outer harbor.
But I guess I'm not quite sure how I see the public space being particularly limited in the coastal harbor, and what's the rationale for saying no there?
Well, I think I can let Ethan, if you want to jump in at any time, or any of the planning board members. I mean, I think we don't have, there's not one pier in the coastal harbor heading north all the way to Lincolnville. There's no piers in Camden
And they
in the
can't
coastal
build
harbor.
any because it wouldn't meet the requirements of the ordinance.
What do you mean?
You couldn't put a pier with a ramp and a float. Basically, maybe at Northeast Point, but going up to Lincolnville, it's too steep and the beach is too wide. You couldn't put a pier.
I don't know if that ever came out in the real discussions. I think what came out from what I recall the harbor committee chatting about, and I know Will talked about it a little bit maybe, was that it would be so costly to build a structure out there that you may not get one. The reality of costly in Camden, to be honest with you, is
There,
I just-
there are a few spots heading north that it would be possible and would be legal. It would be, I think most of us would agree that putting a dock in that section of the harbor doesn't make a lot of sense. Like putting it on that section of the coast for a boat owner doesn't make a lot of sense. But we know that there was a property owner in Lincolnville a few years ago, which caused Lincolnville to go through this discussion, who was proposing I think it was like a 600-foot pier because of the beach is so shallow, and wanted to do it and have the design.
Right, but we have limits on the length of the pier.
We do have limits on length, and that's what I'm saying. There aren't many spots that it could be done, but it could be done, and it could be done. We could have more floats between Camden and Rockport on that section of the
In that
harbor.
cove there's a couple.
There's
spots
several
in there.
spots through that section, and I
And
think
there are already piers and floats.
but there are already, but we could have more of them. There are also the spots that it would be that they could build them are, it doesn't limit access, to your point of the way boats travel on the inner harbor and outer harbor. That's a different issue. But I think if you look at impacts to environment, storm damage, with these
Aesthetics even.
structures, aesthetics, and the option to preserve that entire stretch.
But we already
And
have,
just-
the permitting process already covers all that.
Yeah, but
But
I guess the point is that someone who wanted to put a pier in front of their house, if they bought the property and have the money,
they could do
could
it.
make it happen.
Right.
And I guess I go to my personal opinion, even if I had the money, do I want my boat out there rocking and rolling? Do I want this long dock out there? Or would I rather somehow figure out a harbor that I can rationally get to my boat and have it be safe when I go away, et cetera? But my question is, if we're just saying there's a flat no, what is the rationale for the coastal harbor to say no?
I don't know, Ethan, if you want to jump in. As I recall, it was ethic or aesthetics and impacts on the environmental.
Environmental protection, those piers are going to be subject to harsh weather. There's going to be damage. There's going to, we still have pieces of pier in Camden Harbor from a inner harbor float that,
But that's all covered. The NRPA, the Maine DEP, and the Army Corps all covers that already. That's already done.
Right. I get that. And I think that's where you say, we have the standard and it's addressed. And
That covers.
Understood. But it doesn't mean that the town can't go further. DEP issues permits all the time, right? I'm not sure they've ever denied a permit for aesthetics or permit for this, that, and the other.
DEP's job, they're doing environmental.
Right. Army Corps.
The NRPA does aesthetics,
And that's DEP. NRPA is DEP.
but it's national DEP, not Maine.
No.
Maine? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they,
Same with Army Corps.
It has to be
in terms of
addressed.
aesthetic impact, they're not.
They have standards and stuff.
They have
So
standards,
they're
but
not, you're
they're-
saying they're not doing their job.
No, I'm just saying, I'm not,
If you actually
it's
look
not
at
saying
the
they're
case
not
of
doing their job.
Kilkenny versus St. George, you will find that the mother of all peers case was actually turned down basically because it was too big in the judge's opinion and the board's opinion.
So, I'm not a regulator with Army Corps or DEP, but if someone is proposing a pier in a stretch on the coastal harbor from Sherman's Point up to Lincolnville, that was very large and it was the only pier, I don't know, I'd look at it a little different than if it was an area that had lots of other piers adjacent to it. And DEP doesn't look at it that way. They just issue the permits, to be honest. Go ahead.
But don't they, I guess my question on that would be, they review the permit application. They do have.
A matrix.
They do have
Standards.
standards and criteria for it, as well as requiring alternatives. One could argue that they are, quote, rubber stamping it. I would question that because I guess I want to see some documentation of that. But also, all of those applications are publicly noticed, and anyone who wanted to challenge them could do so at any time. And once the application is, if it were approved by the Army Corps, it could also be appealed. So there are, to say that the Army Corps DEP permit, the NERPA permits, et cetera, are rubber stamp, I think is going a little too far. There are opportunities for public input, and maybe the public doesn't challenge them on that. That's really the public's issue.
I'll just jump in here. Sorry, guys, I'm up here on Zoom, but the discussion is interesting, and I just want to sort of put a finer point on where the planning board I think stands. Crystal did a good job explaining it, but essentially, I think we look at this as the current situation. If we were to just lift the moratorium and allow new piers and other structures. It's to benefit just a few landowners at the cost or the expense of sort of the overall community. That's the way we look at it. That doesn't make us right, but I think that's sort of our perspective. That there's sort of a privatization of the shoreline, and the risk to the environmental concerns. I think the bulkhead is pretty clear. If you were to allow a bulkhead, the adjacent properties could be very negatively affected by that impervious surface. So none of us that I know of we may have an engineer on the planning board. We're not engineers. We do know that the coastal harbor, the likelihood of a pier going in there could be pretty limited by the current technology. But we were also cognizant of the fact that going forward, technology changes. And somebody could come up with a solution that allowed for placement of piers out there. And that's just something from the planning board perspective that we would like to see not happen. The end result of all of this is that we're talking about recreation, we're talking about aesthetics, we're talking about, sea level rise, environmental concerns, all of those things. But in the end, it goes to the select board and then to the voters. And so this is sort of our proposal. It is on our own initiative. It doesn't make us right. It doesn't mean that we know what's best for the town, but it's what we think is right. And that's why we put it forward. And I think part of the reason for this conversation is there's kind of a little bit of confusion about who does what when it comes to regulating things in the harbor and these piers and floats. And I had raised that issue with the select board way back when this whole thing first started. The process of it going to the planning board and then to the select board and the harbor committee's role in it seems a little convoluted to me. But the reason for this discussion is to sort of to take input from the harbor committee, because we value your input and we value your opinions. And so it's not meant to be confrontational insofar as, we're telling you we know what's right when you guys have a lot of experience in this area. But I think our motivations are pretty clear and we're comfortable with those. And we are also open to hearing the harbor committee's input and understanding why something might not be a good idea. If you can, vocalize those, we're happy to hear that. In the end, we will go on what we think is right and pass it on to the select board. And we don't know what's going to happen from there. And they may say, well, the harbor committee thought this was a terrible idea, and so we're going to go with the harbor committee. They may say, we'd like to see these changes, but not these. We don't know what's going to happen. So I guess, from an overall sort of a big picture perspective, that's kind of where we're at. And we're definitely open to hearing any critique that you have of the idea, but I think our motivation is pretty clear.
I also just want to follow up from what Ethan said was, the sort of the process that we had over the last year and a half was that you guys, the harbor committee, had come up with recommendations for amendments, and that then came to planning board, and we had a formal hearing on those amendments. And the public feedback that we got at that public hearing and since then has been very strongly in support of a ban on any and all new piers. So I think that's why we also continued. I was not initially, and a few other members were not initially vehemently feeling one way or the other, but the more we've had conversations and looked at it, and definitely the feeling of the town, and even going back to the preceding harbor committee's report suggested banning piers several years ago, was another piece of what led us to push this.
Just one more thing real quick. Sorry, Bob, and then I'll let you go.
Yep.
The other thing is that I just wanted to say, and I did say this in a meeting with Jeremy and Josh yesterday, but I want to make it clear that what we saw what the harbor committee did on this moratorium and the new amendments, we were 100% pretty much in favor of everything that you suggested. What came up, for us was just the fact that it seemed that you weren't given the option or the charge from the select board to consider whether or not we should even allow new piers at all. And so that was sort of something that, because we were not charged by the select board with X, Y, and Z, we could take up, and that's what was coming up, as Chris mentioned, in our public, hearings and comment.
I just, responding to what you're saying, you're right, Ethan. We just had the very limited task in our report in terms of questions about the existing ordinance. And I remember at one point the conversation did come up for like a nanosecond about, well, should we have any more piers in the outer harbor? And that wasn't on our menu assignment from the board. But in terms of what you guys are talking now, I guess I would encourage you to really think about what is needed and what is going to be, people are going to be receptive to. And in the coastal harbor, I mean, I'm thinking about the North Haven thoroughfare, the Islesboro thoroughfare. There are docks all over the place. There's not a big natural concern, depending on exactly where someone was putting something. It's part of the ambiance, et cetera. And I just think that it's a hard sell to say that somehow, if someone finds the one location in the coastal harbor where they could put a dock, that's going to have a serious ramification on things that should lead to this blanket prohibition. And I think it undercuts the much more legitimate conversation about the outer harbor, where there's a lot of competing uses going on. And to focus your concerns to, well, is there a way to make that, how many more can there be? Should we just take, that's the place to put down the marker of, no, we really should just stop it now. That what's there can be worked with, but you want to propose a prohibition there. I just see that as a more productive conversation with a real point.
Well, and I guess I just want to chime in a little bit on whether or not the Harbor Committee looked at banning piers altogether. We chose our review to be guided by reports and data. And I didn't want us to come in with a statement of, okay, let's look at banning. Let's just start, with a sort of a large statement. And so what instead we did was we broke it down by public access, habitat, density, and climate change and sea level rise. And as part of that density discussion, we did solicit advice and consultation on how many potential piers would be allowed, residential piers would be allowed in the outer harbor specifically. And we were told, we came up with 4 as the number. And we did have a spirited discussion about whether or not 4 was too many. That could have been 3. Would that have been too many? So by having that discussion, if we had said 4 is too many, what about 3? 2 is too many. What about 2? What about 1? That would naturally lead you to a ban. We didn't use the word banning piers, but to say that we did not look at having no piers in the outer harbor of Camden is not an accurate statement, because if the data had brought us there, then we would have done that. So I always push back a little bit about whether the Harbor Committee was tasked with banning piers. I don't think that wasn't, A, we weren't tasked with that, and B, that's not the way we approached our entire review.
We approached it, we addressed all the conditions
Yeah,
of
no,
the
and-
moratorium, and we hit every one of them.
No, and the work you guys did was phenomenal. And as Ethan said, we've respected all of the efforts. It was what's the next piece? And there was a lot of response saying, let's continue this conversation. The moratorium is still in place. And I think that one of the arguments that sort of sat well with a lot of us was to say, what good does it do to allow more piers in the outer harbor, or more residential piers in those sections? Is there an argument that can be made that they do anything for the betterment of the community, for the betterment of the environment, the shoreline? Like, is there an argument that can be made in favor of allowing them?
Well,
And in turn, other than the interests of a homeowner?
yeah, there's one big argument is the tax base. I mean, our current administration is focused on generating revenue. And look at the tax base and the tax revenue these piers are going to generate.
So you're,
It's an improvement.
it is an improvement to the property, but so is any other improvement to the, I mean, so
No,
if,
a pier is, what's it worth? $1 million?
depends on the pier, but
So you say a pier is worth $1 million. That's $15,000 additional tax revenue for the community every year.
okay.
And
So
we're
there's,
nickel and diming over $40 parking tickets.
okay. That's an argument.
Right.
But there's no other, or very few, to say in a place where, and it's different when you're in somewhere like the islands or sections of coast that don't have harbors, that don't have means that an individual has access to, I mean, I just listened to your discussion about dinghy and moving dinghies at different times of year if you want to have your boat on a mooring. And we know that there are people who live in Camden and keep their boats in Rockport or Rockland or Belfast because it's easier. So the question comes back to, what's the argument to allow 4 or 5 more piers in the coast, in the outer harbor, and in the coastal. And so property values and tax base is what you're
That's one.
coming up with
one
on
argument.
properties that are already some of the highest valued. I mean, you're talking about properties that are already bringing in tens of thousands of dollars of revenue to the town.
So when we're talking about additional,
Well, I think that to some extent, having like Josh's, the data-driven analysis we were doing before or the discussion now, I think the question is much sort of vaguer. It has much more to do with what do we want Camden Harbor is a public resource. What do we want Camden Harbor to mean? What do we want it to look like? What do we want it to be like? And that's the primary objection probably from the people who want to kill the outer harbor floats is just we don't want a bunch of private restricted use of a public resource. And then the question becomes, well, and this is a conversation we did have, how much is it actually interfering with the public use of the harbor? But to some extent, it's an aesthetic question. And I think that those are part of the regulations for piers, that you can have all the scientific thing, but it also is that what you want? Do you want to have a harbor with as many piers as possible, or do you want to have whatever the other choices are? And so I think to break it down by, how many kayakers are interfered with versus how much is it doing in the tax base? I'm not sure those are the concerns people are really thinking about when they think about yay or nay.
Yeah, I would agree with Bob. I appreciate the insight, Mark. We honestly did not consider the impact on the tax base, and that's a fair consideration. It absolutely is. I think the broader question again is sort of what do we envision for Camden Harbor and how much more built up do we want it to be? I think where the planning board is sitting on this one, but again, I do feel in the end, we're talking about the utility mostly to a very few number of people versus the community at large, and that's sort of our perspective on it. And the tax dollars is one argument that can be made to say that it benefits the entire community. But I think, my question would be at what cost? And from our perspective, the cost of having more piers in the harbor would outweigh the benefit, I think, of the tax revenue.
So I guess I wanted to chime in with a few thoughts on this. As part of the review that we did, we talk a lot, you guys have talked a lot in your meetings and the select board has as well, talked about public access and the impact on the harbor. And as part of our review, we did get a rather lengthy lesson from Bill Kelly, the town attorney, who has a lot of experience in this public access issue. And it opened a lot of our eyes to what the public's limited right is to the areas that we're talking about, the intertidal zone.
Yeah.
It is not a blanket right to walk on the intertidal zone by any means. And, you guys have said, someone said, that this represents the giving away of a public space every time a pier is approved. And I kind of push back a little bit on that and say, this isn't actually a public space. This is a space that the public has a limited right to for, I think, 5 specific rules. Fishing, fouling, and thank you, Elliot. Fishing, fouling, and navigation. So I want to be a little bit careful that we don't let our conversation get too big and talk about that we're giving away public space like we're giving away Harbor Park or something like that. We're not. We are talking about a space that has some limited public rights of access That's sort of one thing, just while I have the microphone, there's been a couple of statements that have been made recently that I do feel the need to correct a little bit. And I'm speaking as the chairman of the Harbor Committee, who has put a lot of time into this report. There's been some discussion about whether or not the Harbor Committee's report took into effect or took into consideration other structures. And the moratorium, which again, that is what we reviewed, was the moratorium, was very specific about piers, floats, and other structures. And our review did, in fact, take into a review all of those things. We determined that state reviews, anything that required a permit, was sufficient. The Army Corps reviews them, the DEP reviews them, the Maine Historic Preservation Commission reviews it, and even the state's indigenous tribes are consulted for all of these things. We felt that that was sufficient protection of the environmental, aesthetic, ecological, and public access concerns that were identified in the moratorium. And to say that our review didn't include all of those structures, I think that's inaccurate, and I just wanted to sort of set that straight on the record. There's been a lot of discussion. You guys mentioned the public hearings that you had, and the input that you received at those. We had, I went back through and tried to figure out how many meetings we had on this topic. I think it was 9, might have been 10, 8, 9, somewhere in there. All of those meetings were publicly noticed on the website, the town's website. Our agenda was posted with them as hopefully 7 days in advance, although we tried to make it as much as possible. And that our discussion was posted in the local media. So what are our hearings labeled as public hearings on a particular topic? No. But are they public hearings? Absolutely. And I always preface every meeting by saying this is a public meeting, and we want input from as many people as possible into those meetings. And in fact, we did solicit input from both the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission into this review. We invited them to our meetings. They did not attend and for a variety of reasons. And
Actually, I believe that Ethan did attend several of those meetings.
actually didn't, but that's okay. He did submit some emailed notes, comments, and we did take those into account, as did the Conservation Commission. At the end of let me just finish, please.
Okay.
So at the end of the process, we did get those, and we were somewhat far along, but we paused and we said, let's read through these comments and see if we can incorporate these. Do we address these concerns? We felt that they did. We felt that we did address those concerns, but I saw in one public meeting at the Planning Board level a concern that it might have been at the Conservation Commission level, that did they ignore our comments? And I bristle at that, because I want the public to know we don't ignore anyone. And we don't ignore any comments. We may not like the reaction to it, the way we processed it, or our results, but those are very, very important to me.
Can I just respond
Yep.
directly to a couple? Because I made the point earlier of saying that we had held a formal hearing, and that's where we had a lot of feedback. And there is a distinction between a formal hearing where the notification is different, the process of actually of people coming and speaking and hearing about it. And in those hearings, I mean, we know that the reality is how many people show up to even a select board meeting unless they have a really vested interest. People aren't paying attention. We know that the testimony given at those hearings was people didn't know that these changes were coming. Your meetings are open. I'm not, again, we're not trying to put down any of the work that you did, or to say that you didn't seek comment, that you didn't ask for all the input. That's why we looked at your report and we're really, we said, this is phenomenal. Let's push these things forward. But then we also felt, let's continue the conversation. And in the hearings, what we heard from several people, including members of the Conservation Commission and others, said, we weren't aware that these changes were coming. And why aren't you also talking about limiting new piers? That was a message we heard repeatedly, and we've heard it since those meetings. And it's nothing to do with, and I mean, the reality is you can say every meeting is open to the world, but scheduling, you know, I mean, an 8 o'clock meeting is a hard meeting for most of us to get to.
Some of us have to bring our breakfast.
Some of us still haven't had our breakfast and are waiting for our second cup of coffee, and watched your pastry go down with a lot of.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. This pier moratorium seems to be targeted at a few private citizens. And I think anytime you pass a law that targets a few people, you got to be very, very careful what you're implementing, because I think laws should be for the general public. You're exempting the government, you're exempting commercial, and it's only a few property owners. I think you need to be very careful when you're going to start
And I completely
targeting a few people.
And I completely recognize that and agree with that. And, you know, for when we were first having, I was one of the people who was really not in support of any kind of limits or bans. Ethan will testify. Because, you know, I made the argument, it is a working harbor, you know, limiting, when people were talking about, you'd have to kayak around these things at different
You go behind
tides.
them,
That's just part of, you either go around it or
Under them.
at different tides. That's the nature of being in a harbor. These, again, it came down to how much, what is their use and what is their beneficial impact for the good or for the worse of the community. And the use is, I think anyone who spends any time in Camden Harbor in the middle of summer will recognize that the private piers in Camden Harbor have very little use on any kind of regular basis. I mean, just nothing other than parking a boat in front of someone's house.
If that.
And where the sections of outer harbor that we're talking about, which is really basically from, you know,
Steamboat landing up to Sherman's Point.
yeah, but on the other side over towards
There's one that's
KSU,
questionable
there's
whether
one
you
that you
ever build it.
could go in there. And, you know, are sections of the harbor that have environmental and aesthetic value to preserve as they are. And that there isn't, again, other than Mark's point of the tax base, it's very hard to make an argument that additional piers have beneficial impact to the community.
Do you have a question? I didn't mean, I saw your hand first.
I don't know what the process is, if there's going to be a time for the public to make comments whenever that's appropriate. I can.
Well, are you select board or are you public?
Why don't we let people
We'll
speak?
disclose.
I mean, it's a workshop, so.
Yeah.
Let her rip.
Okay. Do I need the microphone for the?
Probably for recording and video, yeah.
Giving Allison a microphone.
Thank you.
She's been very patient.
I had a conversation with Sophie last night about all the confusion with this, and I think there is, you know, there has been legitimate confusion and different directives in terms of which committees, which boards should talk about this, whose job it is to do what, when is the appropriate time for public input. And I agree with everybody that's none of this is intentional. The public has a hard time figuring out when to provide input, and we don't always give consistent messages. So I personally didn't have the chance to attend many of the Harbor Committee meetings or any of them. I watched a couple of them, but it was never told to everybody, or I certainly didn't do a good job communicating that that would have been the opportunity for, you know, the public to make all of their comments. I generally think we put people on the Harbor Committee or on any committee to provide their expertise and to provide those recommendations. And then at some other time, you know, more comments from the public come filtering in. But I recently had the opportunity, I was asked to speak at a conference with several DEP people and all on the topic of coastal structures. And the topic that they asked me to speak on was the loss of, just from all the pictures and different things that I've posted, they wanted me to talk about structures in Camden Harbor. And I spoke afterwards with some of the people that are actually involved in the permitting. And they said, because I showed some of the applications that we receive and the answers on those applications to questions like from the aesthetic impact assessment, which is one of the things that the DEP does. And they have to answer questions like, how far is it from a place that's frequented by the public? And what we saw for Camden's applications, for instance, is that the answers were consistently wrong. And I don't think that's on purpose, but for the Harbor Road pier that was recently permitted, that said it was more than a mile from a place frequented by the public or a public park. Well, it's right next to two public access points. And I think that from the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of people, Camden has done a really poor job making the public aware of a lot of our public access points. And so when the Harbor Committee went and did the assessment of sort of the build out of all of, what are the possible piers that could be built, I think that was helpful, but it would have been even more helpful if we would look at the totality of not just the public or the private residential piers that might be put in, but also any potential commercial or public piers that we want to put in. Because when you start to think about 4 more private residential piers, but then some public piers right next to it, you're really getting cramped. And we may very well want to have more public structures in the harbor. It may turn out that we need a breakwater. It may turn out that we need and want Lyman Morris, for instance, to build out more of what they have, because there are a lot of benefits to that. But and one of the questions in these pier applications is there an alternative to building your own private pier? And that's where, like for the islands and things like that, for a lot of these people, that is what makes sense. That's the way they're going to get to the water. They have a right to access the water as a property owner. But in Camden, we've invested so heavily in creating all these different options for people. We have really every tier of option. We have the public dinghy dock floats. We have the yacht club. We have Lyman Morris and some other marinas that provide services. And so to me, the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of people is, why aren't these people just using the yacht club? If there's a barrier to access, we should be trying to make these things that are accessible to everybody more accessible, rather than putting all this energy into taking up space with private piers. So the only other thing that I would add is that this contested intertidal zone, it's going to continue to be the topic of many debates. The public has the right for fishing, fouling, and navigation in this intertidal zone, but the high tide line is moving over time. And so that has been consistently moving. Our beaches are formed by erosion in some ways, in many ways. That's that public space. And when you just fix one spot, the reason that in Southern Maine they're not allowing a lot of these bulkheads is because it is impacting this public beach space. And so it's the public has a right of way through this area. And when you allow an obstruction to be placed in it, that's forever. These land attached floats and all these temporary things can go with the property owner's need, but many times the property that builds the pier, the property owner that builds the pier, they move and then they don't want the pier anymore. So I think that it's, looking at just trying to be the guardians of the public space. And, I could go on and on about that, but we should think about the long-term impact of our beaches and what that will be.
Thanks.
Can I just want to make sure that you've used the word benefit over and over and over again as your criteria for making decisions. Yet nowhere in the legal definition of the moratorium is benefit to be considered. The moratorium, as allowed under state charter by the legislature, says to us two things. That there's an overburden of public facilities that's cause for a moratorium to exist, or that the moratorium will prevent serious public harm. So when we consider things, the question to be asked is, does this pier in the coastal harbor, of which there may be one, how are we preventing serious public harm? Or is that going to create serious public harm? If we can't answer that question, then banning piers in the coastal harbor don't fall under this moratorium. They may be something that you could take up at a later date, but they're not consistent here. If you're using benefit as your criteria. So my advice, and I'm going to give it, is that in the future, if you're going to talk about why you want to ban these things, that you should adhere to the strict interpretation of how a moratorium is allowed in the state of Maine. And it's not allowed strictly for you to evaluate benefit.
Well, I mean, yes, but when I'm talking about benefit, that's a future discussion of amending our ordinances, which is separate from the moratorium under state law.
So all of this
I mean, we could-
discussion is for some future event.
Well, no.
It's not related to the moratorium.
I would just add that one of the sections that was voted by voters talks about could pose serious harm to the public, the natural environment, abutting properties, mooring placement, recreational boaters, and public access. And I think when speaking of benefit, that covers just about everything possible there, right? That's the public benefit, right? The benefit of the natural environment being protected. I see that it being covered completely by the moratorium.
And certainly.
Yeah, I would agree with Jeremy's interpretation. I don't think just because we're using the word benefit and it doesn't necessarily appear that exact word, precise word in the moratorium, doesn't obviate that we can't use that term as a shorthand for those terms that Jeremy just highlighted. We're talking about, even this intertidal zone, navigation is one of the uses that's allowed. That's kayaking.
Yep.
And so, we're pretty comfortable with the use of the term benefit. I understand the sort of the desire to parse that out, but it really does cover all of those things and the aesthetics. And, I'll just be frank from my perspective. I don't depend on the DEP to consider the aesthetics or the benefit from the broader sense to the level that maybe we would want to in Camden. That's why it's perfectly within our right to say we want to have a more stringent regulation. And so if again, this is something that goes to the voters and, we just put it out there that this is something that we think would be a good idea. This is where we're sort of pretty comfortably sitting, and it goes on to the select board to say yay or nay. And so far, I haven't heard really articulated anything that changes my mind. That we're certainly not targeting. It may seem like we're targeting individual landowners. That's just by happenstance that they happen to be the few people who have a place that can have a new pier. There's no intent to target any individual. Had I been on the planning board, I don't know, I know this was brought up numerous times in the past, and there's some volatility around what was and was not done. But at any point in time, I'm pretty sure that I would have been sitting on the side of we shouldn't have any piers in the harbor, residential. That would be my perspective. I'm one person. I happen to be the chair of the planning board, but the planning board as a body has decided, and some reluctantly at first, and there was a lot of discussion, but based on input that we've received, And adding any new piers doesn't do much for anybody except for the individual private landowners, and at some pretty significant cost to the rest of the community.
And I
Josh. A few things. I think that when we talk about targeting 4 people, that's only because there's an existing regulation that would keep docks from being somewhere else.
Right.
So it's all a matter of gradation from 0 reg to complete prohibition. And I don't think it has anything to do with the moratorium, because this is about, a bigger, long-term law or ordinance. And in terms of the DEP, et cetera, the DEP standards that the town has to follow, it has to be at least as rigorous as that. It can be more rigorous than that if the town chooses to. Just my opinion, since we're talking about opinions, in the coastal harbor, I don't see any reason to have a prohibition on docks, period. I think there's a very serious conversation in the outer harbor. And I think kind of how Allison was just describing, that it's actually part of a bigger conversation, because the public resource is not just the dirt that Josh was talking about, where the pilings are put and who might walk. Because when the tide comes in, that dock covers from the high tide all the way out to the end of the float, and has some impact on the public resource, which is essentially the top of the water. And so it seems you can have different conversations about what private docks do. If we have the same concern about this public resource, if Lyman Morris puts its thing there, well, those conversations are different, because the public benefit of what is offered there might be different, the economic benefit, et cetera. And then we've got the idea that there might be these breakwaters out there. So I sort of feel like right now there's a conversation occurring as if these other conversations don't exist. And so it feels, I don't know, premature. Maybe the other conversations should be moved up, because it's part of one bigger conversation of what the harbor is going to look like 5 to 25 years from now. And I think that that's where in terms of this proposal, the focus should be on what are we doing with the outer harbor in the big picture, not just thinking, well, there's 4 docks. No, it's not. There's any number. Well, let's just change the laws and allow no regulation of docks, that anyone can put a dock out there, because that's actually the starting point, and then you go along the continuum of regulation. So I just feel like the real conversation is about how do we envision the outer harbor, for the next generation, because I'm only going to see a little bit of it. Thanks.
Can I just chime in very quickly?
Go ahead.
This is Lucia, and I apologize for not being there in person this morning, but speaking of aesthetics, and we were talking about the coastal harbor, I think that it is a resource. I mean, the beauty of the coastal harbor not being fettered by lots of piers is definitely a resource. And we also, as a town, have to think about, the tourism aspect. And we have lots of boats that go out and enjoy the beauty of the coastal harbor. I don't have so much of an issue with the outer harbor and the inner harbor as I do with the coastal harbor. And I think the aesthetic quality into the future of the coastal harbor is something that really needs to be considered. And the potential for it to be inundated with future piers, I think, does need to be considered, and what that does to the resource of the visual quality of the coastal harbor, because that is definitely part of the resource.
Josh, I'm looking at your agenda that you prepared and circulated for this meeting.
That's actually
and,
Jeremy.
we've had
Just to be clear, this is Jeremy's meeting and it's Jeremy's agenda. But
Oh, Oh,
okay.
it's Jeremy's meeting. Okay, well, we've had discussion and the last item describes next steps. And I think it'd be worthwhile to discuss next steps, both within the context of this joint meeting and for the Harbor Committee also. What are the next steps? What are we to do with this?
For you and
I guess it's coming to me. So the select board's going to have a decision to make in January, February at some point, whether to extend the moratorium out another 180 days.
Is that endless?
No, you have to make substantial progress. And, this would be the fourth extension, which is getting long in the tooth for sure, right?
Sad.
That said, we're here meeting, discussing this issue. The planning board's had workshops on it. I'm ready to draft, and I started drafting amendments to Chapter 290 that would, in essence, prohibit these structures. My plan was to take them to the planning board at a workshop and then at a public hearing, so that the select board can be more prepared or better prepared to deal with this issue come January when they need to decide whether they're going to extend it or not. I would also at the same time have drafted changes to Chapter 108, which is the harbor ordinance, so that they align. My hope is that I'm going to be drafting a guidance document or a memo of some sort that has take us from the beginning of the moratorium to where we are now, so that it's very clear to the public and to the select board and to all the committees where we are, and what paths we have in front of us. It's clear the planning board wants involvement from the harbor committee. It's clear that the select board wants some involvement in the harbor committee. Having more joint workshops, I'm not, I don't know if there's the benefit. You have a meeting coming in December, right? Is your next harbor committee, and then your next one will be January, and then right after that is the select board needs to make a decision on the moratorium extension. So my hope is that the harbor committee can participate either in the workshop session with the planning board, and then obviously in the public hearing piece. Those workshops are generally, the planning boards hold those on Zoom primarily. So I think that we could get a lot of input from the harbor committee and the conservation commission and planning board and the public during that process. And then we would have a public hearing in this room where everyone can weigh in on it. There's not going to be, I don't know if there's going to be consensus amongst every committee or commission or board, right? It's not how it works generally. But I think it's appropriate to move something forward so that the select board has actionable information in front of them to make a decision in January. So that's my hope, is that we'll have another workshop at least on this issue on Zoom during a regular planning board workshop, and that the harbor committee can participate and will participate either as the full committee or just as members of the harbor committee sharing your thoughts. That's my plan. I think that's the most logical path forward. Does that make sense, Elliot? Any comments on that from anyone?
Will your memo, you said you're going to prepare a memo to the select board on this. Will it?
My 12th memo.
Your 12th memo to add to the mix. Will it explain and, it's not the right word, but I'm going to use it anyway, justify the discussion as part of the moratorium versus the discussion of banning piers on its own? I do feel pretty strongly that while the conversation about the proposal to ban piers altogether is worthwhile, and that's why we're having this good spirited discussion today, I believe that it is separate from the moratorium. I feel like the moratorium, the Harbor Committee's recommendations, which were approved by the voters, though in a slightly awkwardly worded way, do address the moratorium. And so for me personally, I would just like to see that memo, not to put words into your memo, but to just explain, this is why this is part of the moratorium extension, as opposed to this is why, this is part of a
Separate.
larger initiative that the planning board is taking on.
Well, I would just disagree with that in the sense that it is coming out of the discussions of the moratorium of what was the process of began with your work and then came to the planning board. And as part of the moratorium, the planning board said, yes, the Harbor Committee's recommendations are all great, but we think we should go farther. And while we have a moratorium on new piers, let's discuss if we want to ever have new piers. And I think that is certainly covered under the purview of the moratorium.
And I would agree with that. And then I just go back to the July 23rd meeting when the select board extended it, we did the third extension. And a month before that, we had a joint workshop with the planning board and the select board on short-term rentals and piers. The pier discussion was at the tail end of it. But in that meeting, and again, this was a month before they extended the moratorium, they were apprised of what I was doing to kind of codify the Harbor Committee's recommendations. And then it was evident to them. I mean, planning board told them that there was concern about any new additional piers, kind of regardless of what the Harbor Committee's recommendations were at their level. And so I think that certainly played into the select board's decision a month later to continue the moratorium out to January, while also directing me to take the changes that I had prepared based on your recommendations to 108 and chapter 290 they directed me to kind of tweak them and have those apply to only existing piers and to the land attached float. So I think there is some pretty good precedence that this discussion evolved out of that and is continuing that moratorium discussion, that it's not a separate issue. If the select board said back in July, we're not going to extend the moratorium, we're going to let it, pass on by, but we're going to move some ordinance amendments forward to voters in November. And the planning board could have continued this discussion, right? But the select board did decide to continue the moratorium, and they were well aware that the planning board was having discussions about looking at banning them. So I think it's all part and parcel of the same.
I was just going to,
What's the first time the voters could actually vote on a prohibition of piers? Not the moratorium, but an actual proposal to bar piers.
Yeah, I think it would be June.
and just to loop back, like at the workshop that we had, the planning board and select board had, we were looking at these different timeframes of saying that the recommendations that were on the ballot in November would be in time to get on the ballot in November, but that there was still discussion about permanent bans, and we wouldn't have that in time for the November ballot, but it would be possible for June, and that was part of extending the moratorium.
And that's
time.
And either a total ban or some variation on that
Yeah.
is the consideration of that, the potential vote in June is the only thing that continues to justify the moratorium. So in other words,
I think the thing
if
that
the select
justifies
board
them-
was interested, they could say, we are going to extend it to July 1 and we are going to get off the pot by June.
Yeah, you have to extend it for 180 days. You can't extend it for less or more. So it's whatever from January to whatever goes out. And then a March generally is when we have to have hearings done at the by March for the planning board to get things to voters in June, once they go through the select board and all that, maybe April. But so I'm just envisioning that that June vote will have some wording in there that it would make the moratorium go away if the moratorium lasts a little bit longer than June. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Jeremy, just a question. At least as far as wording goes on this, would it help to kind of at least separate it out to let people know that we're also looking at this total ban on piers? I mean, I know that you guys are saying it's included in the moratorium, and it is, but if people aren't really reading through the whole moratorium, they may be missing that part, and I think it is a really important piece. That's what my question was.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of directed to draft some document that will be very clear to the public and to committees and the board, select board.
Okay, so
So
you would
that's my
really-
plan.
You would,
Yeah,
It'll
I
be
will
pretty-
tie it all together.
It'll be pretty clear and pretty
I mean,
apparent to the public, I think.
well, that's
yeah,
good.
especially because I envision, to be honest, I envision hoping to have the planning board public hearing on this prior to the select board making a decision on extending the moratorium, because I think that's that's very important to have that hearing go forward. Because that's when the public, and I appreciate, Josh, these meetings are open to the public, but the amendments get posted, what the changes are proposed to ordinance, and it's a formal process. So I'd like that to play out prior to the select board's decision to extend, because that's where information is actually received formally on zoning amendments
Right,
that
yeah.
address this.
Okay.
Would it be possible, one of the things that Sophie and I talked about was just that the Harbor Committee put together this memo that said these are the things we considered, and this is why, and blah, blah, blah. And that hasn't really happened for the planning board recommendations that I'm aware of. And so
Yeah.
was realizing that, Sophie attends most of these meetings. I've attended a bunch, some planning board meetings and conservation commission meetings, and we both attend the select board meetings, and we had a really different version in our heads of like what's been talked about and what's known and what's not known. And so I think just having something really just for the public too, that says, this is what was considered, these are the reasons, why we're considering prohibiting new piers. And then just the basic, like a basic FAQ of what does this mean for existing piers?
Yeah.
And really, we get really complex with all of this legal language, and I know that's really important for your aspect of what you do and make sure that everything we're doing is legal, but just the basics for the
Yeah, that's my plan.
public, is that gonna be part of the memo?
That's going to be part of the memo. I think that's
It's
where
quite a task.
I've been directed towards this. So I saw an email this morning. So
Oh,
yes,
you did, okay.
yes,
Jeremy,
Not me.
no, all good.
since I've been on the Harbor Committee, I think was one application that came in for a pier, and it went through all the regulatory stuff. We voted on it, we looked at it, went to the select board, and they approved it. Then I think there was another one, but it never got through the whole process.
Yep.
So there's one that was sitting out there approved, but then the moratorium came along. It was retroactive to before the date of that approval, right?
Yeah.
So as far as that property owner goes, how much of a hit is the town going to take in terms of taking under the constitutional definition regarding that homeowner?
Yeah.
And what they moved forward based on a set of, they've invested a lot of money. They went to the town. They went through the entire regulatory process. The town
Not the
approved.
entirety.
It was approved by the select board, correct?
It was not approved by the select board.
It went through planning board. but
It went
did
to
not
Harbor,
go to-
went to Harbor Committee, went to Planning Board, and then it never moved to the Select Board. The Select Board did not take it up prior to the moratorium.
The
vote.
first one or the second?
The second one.
Okay,
You're-
the
You're
first,
referring to,
I'm referring to the first. one.
that one's constructed. That's, that's done.
So they,
Not
No longer walk between the two
Right.
public houses.
So-
That one was not covered by the moratorium.
oh, so the moratorium didn't go back as far as the
No,
first one?
that's the one on Harbor Road, and that one that's done.
Just the second one. So they only did whatever they did, engineering and.
Yeah, they did not, and the one that you're
So-
referring to on,
So is there any consideration that we have to give that homeowner?
well, I would say I'm reviewing that file currently.
I mean, just from the legal standpoint,
Yeah.
I mean, are we?
We're
getting-
protected. As I understand, I've talked with Bill Kelly on this, we're protected and it's not a taking. This happens all the time. It wouldn't be a taking.
Yeah, I was actually thinking taking
The harbor one.
the one, the
Right.
first one, because
Yeah.
they were approved.
Yeah.
Therefore, we would be removing something that
Right.
exists.
No,
No, we did talk about it a little, and you could make the argument that there's.
The second one never really got completed.
Yeah.
I never went through the whole process. I will say I'm reviewing it on a different light because as I understand, the pier that we're referring to on Outer Bayview, there's an existing pier on the adjacent property that is now owned by the same property owner. It might be in a different LLC,
Mhm.
but as I recall, the Cawley Pier was constructed at such a length because it was determined, because it was actually approved as a consolidated pier and not a standalone individual property owner pier. And I think there may be some legal, and I'm still digging on this one. I think that there may be some legal issues with that property owner having another one adjacent to it because it was originally permitted. That property, that land where I believe that they're trying to put that other one
Mhm.
is actually tied together with the consolidated pier that's on the adjacent property.
Okay.
And as I understand, going back and doing, and I've been dove into it and I've been pulled
So I
away
just
from it
wanna make
on and
sure-
off.
So that
So
one that originally got approved,
that's done.
that's happening.
That's done.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
over the boards.
Yep. Yep.
We're not going back to them and saying
We
you
are
can't
not.
have your
It's done,
pier.
I think.
Right.
So there's only one pier that's on the table?
There's only one pending
There
application.
was-
That would be
there's
the
one
Sherman
the
one
Sherman
out
pier.
on
That
Outer
would have to
Bayview.
start over anyway.
One?
Yeah.
I can't hear everybody.
Just one pier, that's the Coastal Harbor one out on Outer Bayview.
That's all?
That went to Planning Board and Harbor Committee and did not make it to the Select Board yet, if that's what you're referring to. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yep. Different LLC, different owner,
Yeah.
but same owner.
Well, that's their choice, so.
So I appreciate this. Like I said, I'm going to try to draft and get some information out there to you folks and everyone. And I'll keep you in the loop on when the planning boards will hold a workshop, and we'll do those on Zoom because the board does feel like I think that's the easiest way to get everyone's involvement. No one ever misses those Zoom meetings, workshops.
Jeremy, on a positive note,
Yeah.
I've been struggling with the moratorium and how it continues after the vote, but you did clarify that. I mean, the moratorium was created because of the desire for a peer application. And I'm probably not confusing the issue, but anyways, you clarified it.
All right.
Oh, let's end on a positive note.
I mean, it was challenging. I mean, no doubt. You guys spent all that work,
Yeah.
came up with your recommendations. I tweaked the harbor ordinance, tweaked the zoning ordinance, took it to the select board, and then it was like,
Yeah.
breaks a little bit, and then it got tweaked and modified in that process. And so went to voters, was not the stuff that it actually fully was vetted by the zoning ordinance.
Those
or
articles
the
were
planning
very
board.
bizarre on the ballot.
Yeah.
Very
well,
bizarre.
We try to make that happen purposefully.
Do you agree with the federal district court? Do you
Occasionally.
agree with the First Circuit?
All right. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And I'll, like I said, I'm going to get memos together and get some information. So it's a little FAQs are a little more straightforward and try to bring you guys into this discussion. Continue.
Sorry, Jeremy.
No, go ahead, Elliot.
Bob was prematurely departing.
I see. Bob.
I think finished business. Josh, next Harbor Committee meeting.
Oh, my goodness, we didn't do that at the last one,
Zoom on
our
Thursday.
previous
Not
meeting.
Thursday.
Heavens.
Okay.
Well, let's see, Elliot, it's supposed to be the second Tuesday, so that would be the 12th.
Yeah, okay.
Am I right, guys? That's second Tuesday?
Yep.
That is
That's
the
right.
second
We do.
Tuesday, yes.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, I wondered if that was.
So, subject to on-the-fly correction. Correct. By the
I
chairman.
haven't been in quite a while.
Maybe I'll do an update from you guys.
Hey, thanks, everybody. I'm just gonna step out now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I get to work. Thanks.
All right, Jim.
That's it, well, they stacked 2 cords of firewood yesterday, so then it's to sit.
Oh, and then sit for 2 hours?
For 2 hours and stand up again. Oh, the thighs, hello.
Hopefully it wasn't a handout.
Well, I can get it in Gartland.
Yeah.
If I have a reference tomorrow.
It wasn't an emergency. This is, all right. I'll send you some. Just send me.
Yeah.
So.
This is not used to the form here, but